Okay, I'm sorry this video is coming to you guys way later than I wanted it to. This week has been E3 week, and because I am interning at a game journalism company, your boy has been very busy with that. But now I'm finally here, finally ready to give you this video, so welcome back to another multi-album review. And as you can tell from the title, these are the two albums that I'm going to be covering this week. We have the new Maroon 5 album, Jordy, and the new Migos album, Culture 3. Both of these records I was expecting to drop this week, and they did release on time, so now here we are. And to be honest, I kind of feared for the worst when it came to these two albums, and there was a little bit of weak sauce this week, but fortunately, one of the albums actually turned out to be better than I expected. One's better than none, am I right? So now that I blabbered on and got a thumbnail out of this, let's just jump into the video. First off, let's start with Maroon 5's latest record, Jordy. This is the 7th studio album from the California pop music warehouse Maroon 5, their first record since 2017's Red Pill Blues. I reviewed that album on my blog back when it released. You can find that at the link in the description. And while I wasn't really a hater of Maroon 5, that was the first album that showed me what was really wrong with this group. I remember suggesting that the only people I could recommend the album to were people who enjoyed pop music that put them to sleep. Even with that album stinking the place up, Maroon 5 continued to have successful top 10 peaking singles with Girls Like You and Memories from this record, both of which I actually enjoyed. And now they're finally here with the new album, and a part of me was thinking that it had the potential to be a bit different from some of Maroon 5's other stuff. I know that's bizarre to even think about, but the album's title is a reference to the group's former manager, Jordan Feldstein, who passed away in 2017. The single Memories was a dedication to him. A part of me wondered if that was a sign that this album would be a change of pace for the band, or maybe a detour into something a bit more emotional. Of course, it was wildly optimistic for me to think that Maroon 5 would ever change. They're essentially a pop music factory that just manufactures safe radio-friendly music that pales in comparison to better pop stars that actually give a shit about making music from the soul. So it turned out the record was a lot of what you'd expect from the group. The deluxe edition is 14 tracks, topping out at 43 minutes, complete with some feature appearances that make you scratch your head in confusion. And even when I tried to approach this album with some optimism, I basically just had it spat right back in my face. At this point, Maroon 5 is the musical equivalent of that embarrassing relative who you always have to see no matter how much you want to cut ties with them. So you just kind of hide your face in shame whenever they do literally anything. And just listening to this album made me want to hide my face in shame, even though I had no involvement with its creative process. If you want to even call the process creative. As you would expect, a lot of the tracks here are just basic pop radio concessions with pretty much nothing subversive or interesting to them whatsoever. You can just go up and down the track list and rattle off any number of songs that are completely forgettable. It's not even like the songs are absolutely offensive or hideous, but rather they perfectly embody that phrase, "it's so inoffensive that it offends me." Tracks like Lost and Lovesick, for example, literally do nothing that hasn't been done by 70 different pop songs in the past, and they really don't do anything better than them either. In terms of the offensively bad ones, there are tracks like Seasons and Can't Leave You Alone, where Adam Levine tries his hand at making songs that for some reason lean into hip-hop styles. Remember what I said earlier about that embarrassing relative? That's what Adam Levine sounds like when he tries to put rap flows on his songs. Now, I will give credit, there are a few nice singles here. As I said, I like Memories, and I also enjoy Nobody's Love, but they succeed in how they actually go down a more emotional route for the group. They feel like they were actually crafted with some heart, and they actually sound like songs made by human beings with souls, not machines inside of a factory punching numbers into a pop song generator and just throwing whatever it shits out on a conveyor belt to send to pop radio. And as I said, the album is stuffed to the brim with features, and I mean, if nothing else, I at least appreciate that they take away from some of the monotony of the album, even if some examples stick out for worse reasons than others. Beautiful Mistakes has a few sweet moments, but gets swallowed up in its shallow averageness, only being memorable because of Megan Thee Stallion's energy on her verse. Echo counteracts these goofy, high-pitched vocal passages and a weak hook with a Black Bear verse that does nothing more than float in one ear and then fly out the other. Remedy is the type of track that doesn't do too much to make me angry, but it fails in that it completely wastes Stevie Nicks of all people. And I can't speak for everyone else, but I feel like making a song that wastes a Stevie Nicks feature is a crime that should be punishable by law. There should be no way that Maroon 5 should be able to do Stevie Nicks so dirty and get away with it. Near the back of the album, there are tracks like One Light with Bantu and Convince Me Otherwise with H.E.R that really only fall into the tolerable tier by way of the featured artists dominating on them. Bantu and H.E.R take their songs and run with them, especially H.E.R. She kills it on Convince Me Otherwise, to the point where I find myself wishing those featured artists made solo versions of these songs without the Adam Levine experience. Also, the aforementioned Can't Leave You Alone shoehorns in a posthumous Juice WRLD feature that comes and goes way too fast to even make an impact. Another point to the music industry for grave digging off of a dead artist by slapping them onto a random song solely to maximize profits. Also, the remix of Memories nearly kills the song. YG's verse just doesn't add anything to it, and in another act of grave digging, Nipsey Hussle is here. If nothing else, his verse surprisingly fits a bit better, to the point where it almost sounds like something Nipsey himself recorded for the song. But it doesn't save this from being an unnecessary remix, and the fact that it not only closes the standard edition of the album, but comes directly after the original on the deluxe edition, gives this record this weird deja vu feeling in its final moments. Well, unless you also listen to the bonus tracks, but I don't recommend that. Button is an awkward, Taney produced attempt at a reggaeton track, which ew. The song honestly comes dangerously close to existing in the territory of the weird white uncle going up to karaoke and trying to sing Despacito. Anuel AA is also here, and he sounds a bit better, but that's just because this is more in his wheelhouse, so therefore he doesn't sound anywhere near as awkward as Adam Levine does. And Lifestyle is also a collaboration with Jason Derulo, and it's an absolute cringe fest. The vocal patterns on the song and how they try to extend and repeat syllables throughout it end up being more annoying than anything, and it makes this song frustrating to listen to. It's not fun, it's not cute, it's just annoying. Just no more. I don't even want to give an overall sum up because I feel like I've said enough. This album sucks. I'm sure you guys weren't coming here and expecting me to give a defense of Maroon 5 or find something in the album others haven't. You probably just wanted to see me trash it so you don't actually have to listen to it. To that effect, I hope I did a good enough job. Note to self, stop going into Maroon 5 albums with optimism and hoping they'll change their ways. Yeah, it should be obvious, but Maroon 5's JORDI is gonna get an awful rating for me. No more, please. Just no more. Well, let's just wash the sour taste of that album out of our mouths and talk about this new Migos album, Culture 3. The Migos, the famed Atlanta rap trio, are finally back with their 4th studio album and the 3rd installment in their famed Culture series. While these guys have been very big and very influential in modern day hip-hop, some of you may know that I haven't been able to get into them as much as others. Back in 2018, I reviewed the first Culture album, and while I know a lot of people really enjoyed that record, I just couldn't get into it, though I do acknowledge that maybe I need to go back to it with fresh ears and give it a re-listen. I can't say the same though for Culture 2, the follow-up that began the Migos trend of preferring quantity over quality by stuffing the album with 24 tracks that stretched over an hour and 40 minutes. After that, the 3 members of Migos, Quavo, Takeoff, and Offset, released their own solo albums that didn't really do much for me, though I did love Offset's Father of 4 quite a bit. This album here was supposed to be out all the way back in 2019 after Quavo Huncho, The Last Rocket, and Father of 4, but it's only just now shown up on our doorsteps. Now, despite my enjoyment of Offset's solo project, that alone didn't suddenly make me jump for joy at the thought of a new Migos record. Culture 2 was an agonizing listen that still leaves a sour taste in my mouth, and I wasn't sure if the Migos were going to double down on what they did there or use the extra time to craft and care for the music more. As it turns out, the track list revealed that this album would be 19 tracks stretching about an hour and 15 minutes, which I suppose sounded the tiniest bit more palatable than Culture 2, though I did have some worries that the album would still feel about 12 tracks too long. Regardless, I tried to be as optimistic as possible with this record. It can't get worse than Culture 2, and with how long it took, hopefully the Migos at least took some of the criticism of that album into account when crafting this one. And miraculously, not only does this album not suck, but it's actually pretty enjoyable. Maybe I've just gotten into a mindset with the art and media I consume where at the end of the day I just want to be entertained, but believe it or not, this album pretty consistently kept me entertained. It's not like the Migos are suddenly getting conceptual, reinventing the wheel with their flows or cadences, or suddenly getting deep and lyrical on us, but for the most part it feels like they're not just trying to so frantically shit out whatever they can and just toss it onto the album. It feels like this has a bit more love and care put into it, and it sounds like the boys actually let this rummage for a bit before putting it together. And I think it succeeds a lot in the fact that a lot more tracks have a lot more colorful production. I found myself enjoying the instrumentals on tracks like Avalanche, Birthday, Modern Day, and Roadrunner a lot, and I found that the Migos still managed to ride these beats well enough to keep them interesting. Also, even though I wasn't crazy about it as a single initially, I have to admit that Straightenin' definitely grew on me when I heard it with the rest of the album. It's a lot more immediate and catchy with a very sticky hook that, despite following some of the repetitive styles of other Migos songs, actually works well. There are also several points early on in the album where I found myself really enjoying some of the features. Cardi B goes hard with her appearance on Type Shit, and the beat really goes goes with her. I got a bit of a chuckle out of some of her punchlines on the track too. H.E.R also takes the lead on Picasso, which feels a lot hazier than some of the other songs here, but I think it ends up being very catchy, and H.E.R has enough chemistry with the other Migos to make this a pretty memorable listen. Of course, I will say this record does fall victim to long album syndrome at several points, and there were definitely more than a few tracks that could have either been chopped or just sent to the drawing board for some tightening up. Having Our Way miraculously sees Drake drop a pretty forgettable chorus, and I don't care all that much for the slow feel of the song either. And while Malibu has a very colorful beat and some very energetic performances and fast flows, I didn't find Polo G's slower offbeat flow on his verse to fit the song quite as well. With how bouncy and energetic the beat is, I was just kind of hoping for a bit more out of him. Vaccine, to my everlasting surprise, is not the most cringy thing ever, but I personally just don't find myself as interested in a lot of slower songs like this, even though I think the flute gave the instrumental a little bit of character. There's also a very weak stretch of songs in the middle that do pretty much nothing for me either. What You See feels a bit homogenous compared to a lot of what else is here, and it unfortunately wastes some admittedly solid vocals from Justin Bieber, who feels like he just kind of comes and goes on the track. Jane is another one of those songs that's built on a very repetitive hook, which honestly ends up killing it for me. While it's definitely no Walk It Talk It, it does come dangerously close to reaching that territory. And there's also Antisocial featuring Juice WRLD. Good to know that we now have two major albums trying to profit off of Juice WRLD. I know this album was always going to have a Juice WRLD appearance on it, but that doesn't make the song any better for me. Juice's presence makes up so little of the song, and while I appreciate the attempt at something a bit more emotional, it just doesn't land for me. Why Not has a bit of a downplay but celebratory feel to it, and while that's pretty welcome, there's not really all that much to the song that makes it stand out to me when it meshes with a lot of what else is here. And then there's Mahomes, which is another slow track that lasts over 5 minutes. I'm sorry, but with a song like this, it's just way too easy to zone out for me. I see why some people like these kind of tracks that take things a lot slower, and there are times where it can be done well, but when the song is 5 minutes long, it's hard to not want the record to move on a bit. Also, the weird moments where the boys spell out their words instead of just rapping them don't come across as anything other than awkward for me. That constant S-U-C-C-E-S-S, having success, just doesn't do anything for me. Handle My Business also has some interesting ideas going for it with some catchy flows that elevate a pretty simple beat, but the very unfocused feel of the hook where Offset randomly goes into these short talking moments just makes the song lose me a bit. Thankfully, the album doesn't waste its final moments, saving some of the bests for last. Time For Me is another track that takes on more of an emotional feel as the Migos look back on their days of trapping and robbing, and I think this attempt at going for a more emotional feel hits a bit more for me than previous attempts. I appreciate the introspective feel of the lyrics, and I think these guys ride the mellow beat very well. Light It Up also has a posthumous verse from Pop Smoke, and with all the posthumous verses I've had to listen to this weekend, I hope you don't blame me for worrying that this was going to be another case of exploitation. As it turns out though, the song is quite good. The Migos adjust themselves to the drill sound very nicely, and Pop Smoke's verse actually sounds like it was integrated with care and not just done to make a quick buck. And the album concludes with the single Need It featuring Youngboy Never Broke Again, which actually was a huge surprise. I wasn't expecting to enjoy this as much as I did, but I think the beat is plenty emphatic and loud, and I love the structure of the flows here. Throughout the song, Offset and Youngboy trade off lines on their hook and on the verse, and then when Quavo and Takeoff come in, they also trade off bars, which I think is really great. To be honest, I'd actually like to see the Migos go in this direction a bit more in the future. Sometimes when the Migos spit their entire verses themselves, it can make the song feel a bit needlessly long. I kinda like hearing them trade off the bars a bit, as it shows the chemistry that they have. I'd be interested in seeing the trio do more of this with their future music. Overall, I'm a bit surprised, but nevertheless happy to report that Culture 3 did not suck. It was actually a pretty enjoyable record that featured much more colorful production than before, all three members doing a solid job with their flows, and a pretty impressive set of feature appearances that round things out nicely. It's not totally reinventing the wheel, but with how boring and repetitive Culture 2 was, it's just nice to hear the Migos making music where they don't sound like they're half asleep at the wheel. There's more genuine energy and excitement here, and maybe it's because I wasn't as crazy about the original Culture as everyone else was, but this is probably the most fun I've had listening to a combined Migos album. I will once again stress that this album did not need to be as long as it was, and it is another case of an amazing 10-track album hiding itself in a good 19-track album. Even though I enjoyed myself, it continues to be clear to me that this group's label Quality Control should really be calling themselves Quantity Control if they want to keep releasing long albums like this. Regardless, while I still think the Migos should work on tightening their album lengths and shortening their track lists a bit, I'm at least happy that this rather long album turned out good, and after years of waiting, Culture 3 didn't crash and burn. It's a solid album with quite a few highlights that mostly mostly manages to avoid some of the pratfalls of the group's last record, even if it does give way to long album syndrome at some points. And if Migos can continue to deliver music like this but just tighten up the length of their records a bit, we could see them drop another genuinely amazing project sooner rather than later. In the meantime, this is a very solid album, and it proves at least for now that Culture 2 was a mere blip on the radar and not a sign of worse things to come. All in all, I'm definitely going to give Migos Culture 3 a good rating. Not an excellent, it definitely didn't need to be 19 tracks, but all in all, this was a solid album and a nice surprise from the Migos. So yeah, that's this week's new music. Not all great, but especially given that I wasn't having super high expectations, it was nice that they both didn't crash and burn. Having one good album is better than having no good albums. Either way, that's just my opinion on these records. What did you guys think of them? Did you love them way more than I did? Did you hate them way more than I did? Were you just completely indifferent? Which one did you prefer? Whatever your thoughts and opinions are, leave them down in the comments below. Let's keep this civil and have some fun as we like to do. If you guys want to hit like and subscribe and support some of my other ventures that I have linked in the description, thank you. If not, it's no big deal. I totally understand. In terms of what's next, I believe later this week Rebecca Black is dropping her new album, and that is one I am definitely going to give a look, so stay tuned for that. But until next time, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.